Next project, we worked with Mercedes-Benz. By the way, all of the slides we're showing, all the images, produced by the students for their proposals to the companies. So all of the graphic design in here, all of the imagery in here were used by the students. They didn't take this picture necessarily. Mercedes opened up some stock photos for us, but they took a lot of the pictures. And then the BMW one, they took all of the pictures. With BMW, this is one of the leads of, or excuse me, Mercedes. This is the lead outreach coordinator for Mercedes. And then this woman just kind of cut off. She's the lead architect for an architectural firm called Gensler, who was building the building that we're creating this proposal for. So going back to the BMW, that BMW we did 2 years ago. And so it takes, the course takes 10 weeks. All the proposals and all of those things happen in 10 weeks. But then to produce the work, usually it takes a year or so afterwards to coordinate all the fabrication and to get on everybody's schedule. So this one happened very recently, so nothing's been made yet. Although this student got a job directly out of the course. He's working now with a high-end printer. Actually, he was the person, of all the students that had different jobs, he was the person that coordinated with the letterpress and the offset printer. And now he works for that printer doing their in-house design work for pre-press.
What's an offset printer?
Offset printer is how this is printed. So it's the big machines with lithographic plates that are printed, color separations go in and the print goes out the other side. It's called offset because there's a plate and then there's a rubber blanket, and the plate prints to the rubber blanket and the rubber blanket transfers the ink to the paper. So it's an offset printer because it's printing onto something and then off onto something else. As a graphic designer, probably 90% of what you're going to do, 80% of what you're going to do is for the web. But some of what you do is eventually going to find its way to paper. And there's a different way of designing when you're doing that. You have to consider the colors that are coming out, that are on your screen. So for example, your shirt, the original, that's a screen print, right? And so that's not a 4-color separation. That's probably 2 colors. A yellow printed first and then a red printed on top of it. And that type of color separation is called spot color separation. Different skills, and it's an interesting. Doing a class like this gives you the practical experience to understand how to design for those experiences. Again, research, super important. You have to know the design aesthetic of the people that you're going to be proposing to. And so it's not necessarily so much, just having an idea. You have to have an idea that fits in order to be a successful proposal. This is a splashboard of a lot of the individual proposals that were made. The design brief this time was a much bigger budget because they're just doing one item, and it's Mercedes-Benz. So the design budget that they're trying to hit was about $200,000. I don't know how, they probably, so 10 times more. And so the materials they could create were much more ambitious. So in this case, this is a stainless steel fountain that would be, so all of this would have been fabricated. The design brief was to create a meeting place on the campus of the headquarters that would be outside, that would respect the individual workers of Mercedes. And so they wanted some way of displaying names. So in this case, there's a wall behind it, and the names of all of the employees would be engraved on the stone wall. In this case, it's hard to see small, but have you ever seen one of those walls that's made of little reflective badges that when the wind blows, they kind of move a little bit? And so each one of those reflective badges would have been somebody's name and job. And so when you were hired, you'd get two. One goes on the wall, and then one goes to you. So, and so this is a fountain that's lit up. When you look at this fountain from above, it makes the logo. So you can see there's triangles here, and those triangles relate to the facets of the logo. They ended up choosing this one, and then they wanted this one combined with some aspects of this one. They liked the concrete platform because they thought that was a place that somebody might give a speech from. But they liked this is polished stainless steel. It's a Mobius strip. And so Mobius strips are infinite. They have one side, one edge. And so one of the things that kept coming up in the Mercedes literature was constant pursuit of perfection, constant pursuit of excellence. And so she used the Mobius strip to symbolize that constant struggle, that constant pursuit. So then you have to, so once they decided on these two, this is 5 weeks into the class. Then we have another 5 weeks to redefine and redesign the project so that it's more refined. And then we also have to start researching how to get it made actually. Because, it's all fine when you can render it in Maya or whatever 3D rendering program you're doing, but then it has to exist in the real world. And so then you have to start listening to physics because, you can make something very skinny in Maya, but it's never going to hold up if it's going to be real. So we go back to the concept. First concept is this is a performance car company. And so there's this, and everything that they design has a certain aspect of speed and performance. And then secondly, it's got beautiful materials and sort of materials that are pure. So they don't try and make something look like something it's not. If it's wood, it looks like wood. If it's leather, it looks like leather. And so we the first design is overcomplicated. It's kind of like loop-to-loop all around, and it doesn't really represent what a Mobius strip is. The Mobius strip is a very simple, twisted form. And we wanted some velocity in there, so it couldn't be as boring as that. So we started going back to the drawing board, eventually simplifying a great deal. At the same time, we have a lot of money to work with. $200,000 is a lot of money, but it's not a crazy amount of money. So to break off for a second, in Chicago, in the United States, there's a big sculpture by a sculptor named Anish Kapoor called Cloudgate, and it looks like a big chrome beam. Maybe you've seen images of it, but it's a giant sculpture, and it's all stainless steel. And the budget to create that piece was something like $25 million. And so, and that budget includes the engineers, the fabricators, the people who make the proposal to the city and do the legal paperwork, which is significant. And then some portion goes to the artist, and some portion goes to the materials. And so when we started talking to fabricators and saying, hey, we want to make this stainless steel sculpture, it looks like this, a lot of them were like, didn't want to deal with us. It was very complicated. When we finally found some fabricators that were interested, they're like, yeah, but you're right up against your budget. And if anything goes over, you're in trouble. And so we started coming up with, could the design be simpler? Like here you can see it's made out of plates. It significantly drops the cost because you don't have to do a continuous piece. And you don't have to worry about covering up the welds. You don't have to worry about supporting the pieces as much individually. But it kind of looks like a tapeworm. It's segmented, and that concept of speed doesn't really support that concept of speed. And so we started simplifying it even more. It meant that we had to reduce its scale to hit the budget, but then we could increase the scale of the concrete platform. So this is what the final project proposal looks like. And so it's got a wall back here. The wall would have mounted the names of all the employees. And then it gives a person stands about this tall, like this. So that gives you a sense of the scale. And then it has a platform that somebody might give a presentation from. The platform is black concrete, which is actually fairly inexpensive to do. And we showed them with lights, without lights. And you can see as you go around the form, it gets narrower in places and it kind of expands in other places. Kind of looks like like a watch. Yeah, a little bit. Or a bracelet. Now, the engineering that goes into this is pretty interesting because as a class, the class was made up of printmakers, graphic designers, sculptors, and photographers, and advertising design majors. And so each one of the people in the class kind of broke out and did their specialty, but they were all aware of how, all of the different types of skills that went into making the process. And it broadened everybody's knowledge base. One of the things that you're going to want as you're developing your portfolio and developing who you are is to figure out what your major strength is, like if you want to be a designer or if you want to be a fine artist, but then also putting onto it additional skills. So if you're a fine artist that knows a lot about design and presentation, that means that's another avenue of income. It's another stream of income. If you're a graphic designer and you might know more about printmaking, then you have the strength of being able to be that designer that makes things that are printed out. And you can make an infinite combination like design and photography, or photography and design, or design and animation. Since most people are designing for the screen or the little screen, that means that most graphic design, most illustration these days has some aspect of animation to it. Even if it's just straight illustration, it might move a little bit. And so understanding, how to make your work more complex is really a strength. We had to break everything out and make a very organized description of how much everything would cost. In the book that we handed them, it had the costs broken down to materials, to labor, to lights, to concrete, to installation, to transportation of the sculpture, because it gets made in the workshop and then transported to the headquarters. And so roughly, we came out like right up at the top of the budget, $250,000. $50,000. We were pretty sure that the concrete and lighting would get absorbed into the building budget because they're building the building at the same time. We'll see. All right, this is the last project that we did, and this is the one that if you looked on the Facebook page, you might have seen the picture of the final project. This one is called Radiant Awakening. It's with a Hotel Indigo. Do they have Indigo hotels in Seoul? They don't have. Okay. So they are part of the same hotel group as Marriott, but they're the high-end, fancy type of hotel for them. And so the design challenge here is they bought a new building that was half old building, half new building. There was an addition put onto the old building. The old building was built in about 1850, 1860, and it was Art Nouveau style, so really beautiful. And the new building is this brick square. The design doesn't really fit from one building to the other. And since they're a high-end hotel, they wanted to have something aesthetic on the outside of it to make it look better. So again, research. Very first thing we did was to go to the site. In this case, these are Atlanta students, but the hotel that was purchased was in Savannah. So we all drove down to Savannah. It's a 4-hour drive. And they had some of the rooms already decorated the way that they were going to be decorated in final construction, because this was under construction when we were there. And then we also walked around Savannah so the students could get an impression of what Savannah was like. Because this is public art, and it's going on the side of a historic building, and it's in a historic district, so if it looks bad, it's not going to get permitted. And that's the facade that we had to work with. There's not a lot going on there. And if you consider that it's like part of it is attached to this beautiful old building with natural stone and ornate doors and beautiful woodwork, this doesn't fit. And so they wanted us to do something with anything with this front. And so the way this class worked, again, is individual proposals at midterm, and then once we had we chose one of the individual proposals, a complete redesign of that proposal so that it's finalized. My co-teacher in this case was a sculpture professor, so it's sculpture and printmaking primarily. And this is a picture of him working with Danielle, who's an illustration student. So these classes really open up opportunities for people in other design fields. She was working with an idea of ceramic tile, large ceramic tiles that were glazed in sort of a turquoise to go with the red of the brick. And then she was making special ceramic tiles that were shaped like flowers. We used a laser cutter to make models of the hotel, so everybody had their own model that they could work on to create their proposal. And this is a picture of one of the students who had done research. Savannah is a port city, and so he was playing on the idea of sails and the wind and billowing. He didn't do quite enough research. Everything has its chink in its armor. He didn't realize that there was another hotel being built across the street named the Sail Hotel. So he would have been advertising for another hotel. Presentation, again, presentation is everything. When you walk into a room with somebody who might become your boss or somebody who is your professor, it's important that they see who you are and that you're on time and you're doing the best work. These classes aren't just classes you sign up for. These are classes you are selected for. And so, when I was asked to teach this class, I had in mind 4 or 5 students that were the top students in my department. And so did Bodner, the guy I was teaching it with. And so we came together with sort of the dream team of students. You just got to be the person that would be thought of as a member of a dream team of artists. The project that ended up winning drew its inspiration from the style that the hotel was built in, the old part of the building was built in, Art Nouveau. The way that it was expressed in Savannah was the ironwork. And so when you see these really complicated leaf designs that spiral, that's a classic Art Nouveau motif. And so the student was looking at as many resources, and she actually eventually found an Art Nouveau piece of ironwork on one of the streets next to where the hotel was, and and she took a picture of it, made a vector shape form of it, and in Illustrator, and then used a laser cutter to cut out mapboard to represent metal that would be attached to the side of the hotel. And so, in this case, this was the piece they picked. They didn't pick it necessarily straight for its aesthetics. They picked it because of the story it told. They picked it because it related the Art Nouveau style of the hotel to the Art Nouveau style on the side of the building. And going in, the architects and the designers for Noble Hotels knew that we weren't showing them final versions. They knew that we were going to redesign. And so they said, we like this story. It doesn't have harmony with the side of the building, right? It kind of looks like it's just stuck on there. But there's windows going down the center, and it's like sometimes they're covered, sometimes they're not covered. It could kind of be cool to have this shape going through the window, but the designer didn't optimize that. Like, maybe if you wanted to have that interaction, then you could do like a curly Q in front of the window so it was interesting. But it's just sort of there. So they picked this one, and so now it was our job to redesign and begin researching it fully to figure out how to get it made, which is complicated. Savannah is in a hurricane zone. And so, we have to make it strong enough that hurricane force winds aren't going to pull it off the side of the building. We hope. And so we started playing around with different ideas. Great thing about computers and digital modeling is you can do something very quickly and then use the laser cutter and cut it out and like have something in your hands and play around with it on the model, and it's a really quick way of working. We started zooming in on parts of the design and playing around with how we might make them kind of fit more. But then you start thinking like, okay, if this goes all the way to the ground, somebody might climb it. And Savannah has open container laws, and people get a little tipsy, and you can't predict that, right? And so you have to make public art safe for idiots. And so these started working out. This started getting better. So we're taking aspects of the design and we're reflecting them like a screen, and then they can sit naturally in these recessed areas of the hotel, of the wall, and then the windows are cleared up in the center. So the problem, though, is that now it looks kind of antique, and indigo is modern. So we had to keep thinking through. At the same time, we had to start talking about materials, cost, and design. Because the cost on this one, we were supposed to stay around 40 to 50,000, but they liked our design well enough that they moved up to 80,000. They doubled the price so they could afford it. Doesn't happen a lot. And so, what are we making this out of? The materials that we're using, originally the proposal was stainless steel. And so it'd be about 5 millimeter thick stainless steel. And then it would be attached to channel, which is a heavy stock I-beam. And so it's attached all the way down. And then the stainless steel comes in a predetermined size. So it's about 1 meter by 3 meters approximately. And so we started breaking up the channels as 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter, and then 3 meters, 3 meter, 3 meter. And so we could start optimizing the materials that we're making things out of. Then we have to get it attached to the side of the building. You think of brick as something that's really solid, but it actually was a floating facade of brick. And so if you anchored to it, it would just pull it off. And so what we had to do is go through the brick facade and attach anchors to the cast concrete floors. So each floor level is a very strong piece of cast concrete. And so at each floor level, those channels are very thoroughly attached. Does that make sense? So here, we have a bunch of artists who have to deal with engineers. You have to deal with accounting. You have to deal with fabricators. This is why you need to be able to work collaboratively with people. It's way more complex than one person can do. So as we were discussing the materials, stainless steel and aluminum are about the same cost. Stainless steel has better exterior properties, doesn't oxidize, but it's very hard. And the process we're using to cut it apart is water jet, and that works exactly the same way as a laser printer does. So it's, a cool little aside, the vector file that we used to cut the laser cutter for the maquette, same file, blow it up 5 stories tall. No loss of information because it's a vector, right? You can make it as big or as small. the tooling costs for a water jet cutter are very high. And so if you have a hard material, you spend more time on the tool, and more time on the tool costs more money. And so we ended up having to go with aluminum, which also has good exterior properties, but it has to be painted. But we still saved money. And so this is the final look. Another thing that we did is we went from positive shape to negative shape. And that was just a real subtle change, but it takes it from looking antique to something that looks a lot more modern. We're not done yet. So this is a 3D model, so it's always cool with 3D models. You can like fly around it and you know, texturize it as you want and all that stuff. We had to light it. Lighting, we thought, it's a light bulb. It's not going to be hard, right? And we were looking at all these designs in Europe. They light their cathedrals in like, you know, complicated schemes, and they can change, and they're semi-animated. And some of them are really complicated. They can make it look like it's raining on there. They can do all sorts of different things. Turns out it's really expensive. And so, you know, a light kit like this, it has RGB lights in it. It's driven by a computer. It's all weather. You know, we were looking at the lighting portion of our budget was starting to come up to about $30,000 or $40,000 on its own. Definitely put us over budget. So, you know, the unexpected happens. And again, as it turns out, they were able to fold the lighting into a simpler design that could change color, but just two colors, blue for indigo and green for St. Patrick's Day, which is in Savannah particularly a very large holiday. We had to get it past all these different boards. We had the historic building board, we had the public safety board, we had the neighborhood association. And so, you know, again, this is public speaking and being able to write and being able to communicate your ideas clearly. When we went into the historic licensing board, the person in front of us was a business owner who was trying to install a sign. And she gave her presentation and had a picture and kind of what it was going to look like, and they denied her. You know, she didn't have the whole process thought through very well. And so we're sweating because, you know, the people just in front of us got denied. But as soon as they saw the design, they loved it, and it passed really easily because we had all of our organization in line. You know, we had all the forms done properly. We had the engineer's drawings. It was clear that we did all of the work. Here's our budget. Ended up being about $75,000 without the lights. A budget like this, if you're an individual doing a project like this, a budget like this is probably going to be, you know, your portion is going to be between $7,000 to $10,000 of the total budget. And so this is one of those things, if you might have 2 or 3 projects going in a year, 2 years, that's a pretty good portion of your income. That plus, you know, designing, that plus your sales of fine art ends up being something that's easy, you know, not easy to do, but lucrative. And it's something that you're not building it. All you have to do is make sure that your fabricators that are in line can be, you know, building it as you go. You might have 2 or 3 projects being built at the same time. So that's the final model of it, and then this is the pictures of it being installed. So it's also really exciting to have, you know, your artwork on a historic landmark in the center of town. And so you can see the panels here. These are the channels that have been anchored to each layer of floor. This is closer to all the way complete. Occasionally we had to add a brace in because, you know, the original engineer's design plus the change of materials meant that we had to have a couple cross braces in there. The aesthetic of the design is still pretty solid. And this is what it looks like at night.
Very cool.
Yeah, it works out pretty nicely. So this is class. This is what you did in class. That's, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I'm really, as a teacher, the amount that I can provide for my students teaching classes like this is very exciting. You know, I do all the studio work. I do all the theory work with the students. We're building up to this point. We're talking about, how to draw, what to draw, how to do the technical processes that we're working on. How to be a good student, how to, to make deadlines and to basically function in the world. But then when you get to teach a class that that connects your students with opportunities like this is really exciting. And something that's fairly unique to SCAD, the scope at least. During the time that this project was ongoing, other students were working with NASA, which is the National Space Agency for United States government. And they were in the process of creating motion graphics and infographics to describe what their weather mapping satellites were doing. Because NASA, for a long time, had a public relations problem. They had the space shuttle, that's cool, but now they have just satellites going up, and people are like, so why do we need another satellite? And so their public relations problem, to continue to get public funding, they have to show why it's important to have this weather mapping satellite. This weather mapping satellite that is helping farmers do what the farmers need to do, helping you predict what the weather is going to be like in 10, 20 years, which is a big deal because Florida might go underwater. It's low enough to sea level. Another group of students was working with Adult Swim, which is an animation company. And so some of the bumpers, the little shorts in between shows that advertise Adult Swim, are actually student work from class. So it's, again, that's what you did in class today. And so when you go and you apply to a job, you're not just showing them a reel of things that you did during class. You're also showing them these things that are actually getting airtime or actually installed on a building. It's like, yes, my students that were involved in this project can have this on their resume. They said, I worked on this project. This is what I did for this project. And it gives them a lot of credibility. It gives you real world opportunities before you get to the real world. And it gives you also, your professor is there, not your boss. And the professor is going to, tell you, look, you're messing this up. You need to do this way. And you're not fired. You have the opportunity to correct your behavior and figure out how to work with it. It's sort of like it's a nice chance to understand what a basic mistake might be before you actually get fired for it. Right?